President Biden met with a bipartisan group of lawmakers at the White House Monday to discuss his $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan. The meeting comes as Congress returns to Washington and as the president signals his openness to working with Capitol Hill to pass his proposal. Republicans are currently opposing the White House's plan to raise corporate taxes in order to pay for the American Jobs Plan. They're also debating over which improvements count as infrastructure. President Biden said he's willing to negotiate on all of that and expressed confidence in being able to reach an agreement.
I'm prepared to negotiate as to how the extent of my infrastructure project, as well as how we pay for it. A lot of folks saying that the fact that we have millions of people not able to drink water because there's lead and it's coming through lead pipes, I think that's infrastructure. I think broadband is infrastructure. It's not just roads, bridges, highways, etc. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm confident everything's going to work out perfectly.
For more, I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. Hi there, Weijia. So what are the next steps for the president's infrastructure plan?
Well, President Biden has to sell. That's exactly what he was doing today with this initial meeting, and he has several cabinet members doing the exact same thing, trying to convince especially Republican lawmakers that this is the right path forward for the country. But as you heard him say, he knows that he has to come to a compromise, and he is willing to negotiate. What we don't know, though, is how far he is willing to go, because he has made very clear he thinks this package is essential to get people back to work and to stimulate the economy, but also to rebuild the country. And so you're seeing some of his goals right here. And that's exactly why, too, that he's running into trouble, because some of these things are things that members of the GOP do not believe are part of what they consider to be traditional infrastructure. Elaine?
It's interesting, Weijia. House and Senate leadership were not at the meeting. What does the group President Biden met with tell us about where this proposal is headed in Congress?
Well, I think it signals that the president and the White House wants to focus first on the substance of the bill and get it to a point where they think they are ready to negotiate even more, because these are lawmakers who have experience crafting packages in the past with regard to infrastructure. They know what works, they know what members of their party wants, and they know what messages to relay to the president with regard to the substance of this package. And so I think that's why he's starting there rather than the deal-making right away. That said, the White House issued a response quickly after this meeting to say this is, just the beginning, and there will be several meetings with key stakeholders in the future.
The president did say he is willing to negotiate with Republicans and said he's confident that things would work out. Does the White House actually have a plan to gain bipartisan support?
Well, the plan is to go directly to the people, and that's what we saw during the process to approve the COVID relief package as well. And there was overwhelming support from Americans for that bill, and that's what the White House pointed to, even though there wasn't Republican support on Capitol Hill. They were able to say, we went and met with Americans who believe this is the right way to go for the country and to give them more stability as everything tries to reopen. And so we are expecting more announcements from the White House for the president to travel to different areas in the country, along with other members of the administration, to try to make the case to people that they should call their lawmakers and say, we support this bill.
Well, President Biden was also asked about the recent police-involved shooting in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, as well as the trial of Derek Chauvin. What did he have to say?
Well, he said that he has spoken to the governor, along with other officials in the state, though he hasn't called Mr. Wright's family just yet. And he really wanted to stress, which he did many times, that the investigation is still just unfolding. And so he didn't want to speculate about any of the facts in the case. He did mention that the video that, we have all seen at this point was fairly graphic, and that he agreed with Wright's mother, who called for peace at this time. And the president took that opportunity to urge people to remain calm and not to go looting and protesting in a violent manner, because, of course, this falls with the backdrop of the Derek Chauvin trial in the killing of George Floyd. So tensions are extremely high in that area of the country right now. And I think everyone's just waiting and hoping that there is not more unrest, which is what the president urged today when he talked about this.
All right, Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, thank you.
Thank you.